The world spent decades treating the power of the dollar as an unquestionable reality, an unchangeable fate. Bankers believed it, politicians believed it, and ordinary people believed it. Everyone repeated the same idea. As long as the dollar exists, order exists. Yet when we look into the darker shelves of history, we see that no order is ever as solid as it appears. Empires, kingdoms, monetary systems, all of them collapsed one day, and every one of them fell into the same trap, believing they were too strong to fail. The dollar is the brightest example of this ancient mistake. Even today, when we look at the screens, we see the strength of the dollar. Major economies depend on it, international trade is done with it, and in times of crisis, everyone runs to it. But behind all of this lies a story no one talks about. A destiny written around a small table, a decision taken by a handful of powerful men, and an illusion that wrapped itself around the entire world. Everything began in 1944. As World War II approached its end, world leaders gathered in the small town of Bretton Woods in New Hampshire. Official records describe this meeting as a standard economic gathering to rebuild the post-war world. But the truth was never as innocent as the official narrative. In that closed hall, behind the curtains, something entirely different was designed: the monetary future of the world. Economists, diplomats, politicians. Each of them signed a decision that would change the course of history. The dollar will be the world's reserve currency. On the surface, this sentence looked like an economic necessity. In reality, it was the beginning of the United States taking control of global finance. From that day on, the world economy was tied to one single heart, and that heart was the dollar. This system worked for years because the dollar was backed by gold. Every dollar printed had a physical gold equivalent behind it. For the entire world, this meant trust. But the U.S. began printing more money to finance its expanding global presence. The Vietnam War, massive budget deficits, a growing economy. Eventually, the gold behind the dollar was no longer enough, and in 1971, President Nixon delivered a televised announcement. The whole world held its breath. The words that left his mouth changed history. We are suspending the convertibility of the dollar into gold. Suspending, as if it was temporary. But in reality, this meant the complete end of the gold standard. From that moment on, the dollar became a piece of paper with no metal backing. Only belief remained, because money was no longer built on reality, but on trust. This is where the hidden secret of the dollar truly begins. Because without gold, without a guarantee, the only thing supporting the dollar was the world's faith in it. And for decades, no one questioned that faith. Every crisis was solved through the dollar. Every nation held their reserves in dollars. Every international agreement was signed in dollars. The power of the dollar didn't come from economics, it came from habit. After the 1980s, the dollar's real power came not from the economy, but from control. The Federal Reserve's closed-door meetings, the IMF's backstage decisions, the U.S. Treasury's announcements that shifted global markets. All of these formed the invisible armor around the dollar. The world thought this armor was unbreakable. But like every armor, the dollar's armor was full of unseen cracks. The greatest crack was debt. America's national debt grew every year. First billions, then trillions. Numbers too large for human imagination. As the debt grew, the dollar's true strength weakened, because the dollar's hidden enemy was inflation. To prevent the public from noticing the erosion of their purchasing power, the data was always presented controlled. But there was one graph that was never shown: the dollar's real 100-year decline in value. That graph whispered that the dollar had already entered a quiet collapse. Nations saw this. China began accumulating gold instead of dollars. Russia silently reduced its dollar reserves. BRICS countries created new trade mechanisms. Middle Eastern nations started discussing alternatives to the dollar for oil. For the first time, the world openly saw the system that had held for 70 years beginning to crack. But collapses do not come with noise. First come small signs: high inflation, uncontrollable debt, central banks buying gold in panic, nations searching for trade models outside the dollar. This is how the real collapse of the dollar began. Quietly, in the shadows, in reports, in unannounced meetings. Today, the dollar still appears strong, but appearance and reality are not the same thing. Because power does not live on paper, it lives in people's minds. And for the first time, the world is loudly asking, is the dollar truly as safe as it once was? If this question has begun to be asked, then the answer has already been written somewhere in history. The hidden secret of the dollar is this: it is not the product of an empire, it is the product of a story. And stories end when they lose their power. The global economic order now stands on the edge of a major transformation. Gold is returning. Digital currencies are globalizing. Nations are creating trade routes that bypass the dollar. Perhaps the dollar is quietly wandering through the final lines of a long-lasting tale. No one knows whether this will happen tomorrow, 5 years from now, or in the next generation. But everyone feels the same thing. Something is changing. The order is shifting. The curtain is closing. And the world revolves around one question: if the dollar's story ends, who will write the next one?